Stewart Gilligan Griffin is known for being the diabolical mastermind of his family. Even though he's slowly eased away from his more malicious outbursts over the years, he hasn't managed to keep from going completely overboard when pursuing interest or trying to get his way. It's only fitting that we decided to take a look at Stewie's track record and discuss the times he had flown completely off the handle. Today, we're covering the top reasons why this villainous infant should be considered dangerous. First of all, we'll start with the time that Stewie impregnated himself. Stewie had pulled Brian into a very manipulative situation, all because he was worried about the two of them drifting apart as friends. We do have to give the infant some credit, since he did in fact want to sit down and actually discuss the idea of having a child with Brian. It wasn't exactly Stewie's fault that the canine's attention was elsewhere. Had Stewie been able to have that talk with Brian, the whole situation would have likely been avoided. However, this course of events didn't earn a spot on this list just because of how Stewie roped Brian into this twisted relationship. After all, Stewie has been known to have very complex and deep feelings for Brian. Whether fans want to argue if it's meant to be romantic or familial is beside the point. The fact is, Stewie is a kid and anything he feels is going to be overwhelming because he has little life experience to compare to. In a way, it makes sense that Stewie would see Bonnie and Joe, a couple known to secretly resent one another, bond over Susie and see having a baby as a way to mend their friendship. The other reason we had to add this incident is that both Brian and Stewie were neglectful to their children. As mutated as they were, these were still innocent kids. In the midst of all the chaos, most of these children wandered off, getting killed. Stewie stated that one such incident had been when one was torn apart by Joe's lawnmower. After Brian and Stewie finally had their talk, expressing they were worried about giving the other space, the two agreed to simply ditch the rest of the litter at a local shelter. The whole incident was highly disturbing for a number of reasons, and the conditions those children were kept in earned Stewie some charges of endangerment and neglect. The whole thing started because Stewie wanted more of Brian's attention and so acted irrationally to get it. And once Stewie confirmed he got what he wanted, he just dumped the remaining kids off on someone else. Our next mention on this list is when Stewie killed his babysitter's boyfriend. When Lois decided to go on the hunt for a babysitter in episode 8, Simple Rules for Buying My Teenage Daughter, he wasn't thrilled with the idea. That is until he sees the young woman that would be hired for the position, LaDawn. Showing a young protagonist of a storyline falling for their older babysitter isn't an uncommon scenario. Shows such as Dexter's Laboratory and The Simpsons have utilized such a setup. However, Stewie took the simple plot into very dark territory. After Stewie learned that LaDawn was seeing someone and was introduced to her boyfriend Jeremy, he flew into a rage. He kidnapped Jeremy, locking him in the trunk of the car and leaving him to slowly suffocate. Afterwards, upon finding a grieving LaDawn, Stewie shot her with a dart and framed her for neglecting him by throwing a party, resulting in her getting fired. In the end, Stewie came to regret the choice to take out his jealousy on LaDawn. Unfortunately, this wasn't until he came to the alarming conclusion that it was far too late for Jeremy. Too much time had passed and there was no doubt the poor kid was already dead. We next have to mention when he went on steroids. Now, indulging in the drugs wasn't Stewie's idea to start with, it was Peter that was shown to set things into motion. Still, we included this episode due to the fact that Stewie took things even further. One could give the defense that being injected with steroids does tend to make a person more aggressive and irrational, but seeing as Stewie is generally shown to be vain and vindictive under pleasant circumstances, we have to place much of the blame on how the infant generally is. He was very eager to have a chance to throw his weight around, using his new bulk as a way to intimidate other members of the family. LaDawn's boyfriend Jeremy wasn't the only one that Stewie took out on an impulse, as he also killed New Brian. New Brian was a one-time character added to the Griffin family after Peter became fixated on Brian's age. For the most part, this episode revolved around the fact that Brian felt he was being replaced, and so he did everything he could to remind the Griffins why they loved him in the first place. Stewie was the only one shown to not care for the new canine, outright telling him to leave. New Brian's response to this was to mention that even Rupert liked him, and revealed that he was using Rupert as his own personal toy. Obviously, Stewie did not handle that well. The very next scene simply cut to Stewie dragging a bloody garbage bag to the curb before the family read a poorly constructed suicide note. One of the most infamous moments on the show was the time Stewie assaulted Brian to get his money back. After a simple bet, Stewie goes overboard. It had a slow build, with Stewie first warning Brian to have the money within 24 hours, or else things would go poorly. The threat was cryptic, with Brian not taking Stewie seriously at first. In the following scenes, Stewie then proceeded to beat Brian to a pulp, leaving the canine to live in fear. After having his face smashed, being beaten with a golf club, being lit on fire and shot, Brian finally caved and found a way to pay Stewie. Yes, Brian had been the one to agree to the bet. We have to remind everyone, it was only a $50 bet. Next, we have to bring up when he convinced Brian to jump. After a failed trip to Las Vegas, Stewie proposed an idea that was a horribly extreme way to deal with their situation. Not able to simply go on the run after borrowing money from a loan shark and not willing to put the family in danger, Brian and Stewie eventually agreed to take their own lives by jumping to their deaths. Stewie had been the one to propose the idea, claiming it was logically the only real option they had to go out on their terms. However, he hadn't been able to follow through with the plan, quickly changing his mind as Brian followed through with the jumping. The very thought that Stewie was able to calmly convince Brian to take his own life was chilling. Who could forget the episode in which Stewie had let his therapist die? In one of the more subdued and emotional episodes, Stewie has a long heart-to-heart with the preschool therapist, Cecil. The first scenes go as planned, with Stewie refusing to let his guard down. He decided to tear into the man, asserting that he is the one in control of the situation. In the end, Cecil was able to help get past Stewie's barriers and see part of the infant that was hidden. Stewie had a moment in which he felt relief at being able to freely express who he was, but it was quickly masked again when he decided he didn't want to be like other children around him. Unfortunately for Cecil, this was when his heart began to give out. Unable to reach his medication, he pleaded with Stewie to retrieve it for him. Stewie almost does, but upon recalling that Cecil had seen far too much that he didn't want others to learn about, Stewie then casually sat by as Cecil died. On top of that, he also cracked a joke about it not being the man's day when the therapist's husband called to state he wanted a divorce. Next, we have the time that Stewie got Connie arrested. After deciding to take on a bet to prove he could easily become the most popular boy in high school, Stewie had a short fling with Connie. Through this odd lens that exists in the Family Guy universe, no one was able to see that Stewie was actually far younger than he was pretending to be, despite the fact that he's so small compared to the rest of them. Being uncertain about what it meant to actually have a physical relationship with an older girl, Stewie wound up embarrassing himself in front of Connie, who immediately laughed in his face. The next day, Stewie arrived at school only to find out that Connie told everyone that he wasn't able to perform. In retaliation, Stewie tricked Connie into kissing him, with Stewie quickly stripping off his disguise to expose her kissing a baby. Of course, Connie was arrested by school security and is being seen dragged off before Stewie struts off, confident that he had exacted revenge. To say this was an overreaction is an understatement. As this was the ending of this storyline, it's unclear what punishment Connie really received after this incident, but the fact that she was labelled a predator with dozens of witnesses no doubt hurt her reputation within the town. And finally, we have to include the weapons of mass destruction. Stewie had been shown to have the capability of taking out large populations before, but when he grew close to a young girl by the name of Penelope, he indulged in taking out entire countries. These scenes aren't drawn out long, but just from what we see, Stewie was responsible for pressuring a few territories to drop nukes on one another and causing a massive tidal wave. We also saw Stewie casually stand by to allow Penelope to choke a child with tainted candy, which also didn't gain him any redemption. You just watched 9 reasons why Stewie Griffin should be behind bars. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and hit the bell icon so you know when our next video is live. We are the Screen Addicts, addicted to the screen as much as you.